One of my favorite prints is the result of this set of bracketed photos. Let's go ahead and process this again. I'm just going to go ahead and use Photoshop with the Photomatix plugin on this one. So I'll go to Photoshop, merge to HDR Pro. Once the dialog box opens, I'll remove the ghosts. And I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. We'll let Photoshop do its work and set up the file. Alright, back in Photoshop, we'll go ahead and duplicate that background. And I'll go up to Filter, down to Photomatix, Tone Mapping. We have a few cool things going on in this shot. This is actually a tombstone. And we have the sagebrush and things like that going on. We have some light streaks coming through the clouds, a little bit of lens flare there. So I really like this shot. But let's see if we can trick it out a little bit. First, I'm going to decrease this black point to darken things up a little bit. Actually, increasing it darkens it up. But I'm also going to increase the white point a little bit. Now I have the strength set to 100. I'm going to go ahead and bump my saturation up, see what happens here. And we're getting a really nice warm feel to this. Luminosity set at 100. Micro contrast is at 2.1. Let me go ahead and bump that up. I'm going to go ahead and maximize that at 10. My smoothing is down at 0. Because I really want a lot of definition here in the clouds, and I'm also looking for a lot of definition down here in this weeds here in the foreground. Okay, my gamma set at 1.32. I'm not going to mess with that. White points at 2.4, black points at 0.18. Let's move over to color. Let's play around with the temperature a little bit. Right now it's set at 2. Let me drop it down to 0. It cools it off a little bit, and that's a nice shot, but I kind of like it a little bit warmer, so I'm going to go ahead and back up to 2. Saturation, the highlights is at -4. Let's increase that and see what happens. Probably going to give us a lot more orange up here in the clouds. I like that, and it's also a little lavender coming through on that lens flare, and that's kind of nice. But my saturation in the shadows, I'm really going to bump that up, because that's where this green is going to start coming through. We're going to get a lot of more character here in the shadows on the stone face, so on and so forth. Up in the miscellaneous tab, I'm going to decrease my micro smoothing. And I want to decrease it just to the point where I'm getting a lot of definition here in the clouds. I'm not seeing a whole lot of graininess start to show up. Sometimes, especially when you're doing HDR, you're going to get some grain in there in these images. Let's decrease the highlight smoothness a little bit. And see, now we're starting to see some grain right around in here. So I want to bump that back up again. Let's take it up to about 30. And that mellows that out a little bit. So, you know, I'm not too, I guess, too worried about some grain. I just don't want to overdo it very much. Shadow smoothness, I've got that set at 18. Let me take that all the way down to 0. And see, the shadow smoothness, that really doesn't show up that grain as much as the highlight smoothness. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 0, and my clipping is set to 0. Let me click OK. Moving on to post-processing. Actually, this is a little more defined than now that I'm looking at it. This is what I would call an obvious HDR effect. So I'm going to tone that down by simply going up to Edit and Fade Tone Mapping. And I'll just move the opacity slider down until I find something that's a little more natural. Right about 60% to my eye. I really like that. So if we shut that off, we can still see the change in the clouds and in the foreground, so on and so forth. But it's not as overpowering as it was in that previous version. So what I'm going to do now, since I'm going to go ahead, let me see. Let's go ahead and get rid of some of those spots. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my healing brush here. And we'll just take care of some of those little tiny spots. Dust on the lens, water spots, whatever. We all get them. Let me come in a little tighter. See if we can pick some out a little bit better. Since we've got nice rumpled clouds here, there might be more in there someplace, but we're just not going to see them as well, just because of the cloud definition. Let me come back out. All right. So let's do a little further adjusting here. First, I'm going to go up to my vibrance. I know usually I go to curves, but this time I just want to make that color pop a little bit more before I do my curves adjustment. Our lens flare, we can see, is coming in right down over here. We might do something with that here in a minute. Let me go ahead and create a curves layer. And bring those endpoints in. Let's zoom in a little bit. Don't want to darken that foreground too much. So that little curves adjustment really makes that pop. All right. I do want to take care of this little aberration down here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. Let's go ahead and go to, let's try color. Let's just paint with a brush over the top of that in black and white a little bit. So I'm not really removing the lens flare, but what I'm doing is just taking the color out so it's not as overpowering as it was before. We can actually go in here with a soft light layer, and black is the foreground or some dark color, and just paint over the top of that to darken it up and make it fade even more. So while it's still there, and we know it's still there, sometimes people are going to have to look pretty close and say, boy, I wonder if that was a lens flare there. So we're taking the focus off that bright spot anyway. We might even want to come in here, sample one of these colors in the weeds, like the green or one of the browns, something like that, and come in here and paint with that color. Another option is come in here on this background copy layer with a burn tool. I've got it set to mid-tones right now, and exposure's up at 37. We can actually darken that spot and totally take it out. All right. You can do the same thing up here in the clouds if you like. You just go in there. Let's go into the color layer. Set it to a gray shade. Zoom right in on that guy. And just paint the color away. All right. And again, we can go in there with the burn tool and darken that spot. But you can see in the clouds, that's really not going to work too well. So I'm going to undo the burn tool in this instance. I'm going to go back in on my color layer. And we'll just wipe the color out. It doesn't seem to be wanting to cooperate much. Oh, I've got the burn tool selected still, that's why. So we can paint away the color in there. Something else we can do is go in here on the soft light layer. Again, make a color selection somewhere in the image, up here in the clouds, and paint over that spot with that earth tone. We're still getting a little bit of blue in there, or that purple stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and try this on another layer also. And there we go. So on a fresh, normal layer, we were able to just wipe that away. All right. So we still have this little streak coming down through here, a little off color, but it's not obvious lens flare. It's just a little splash of color in there. All right, let's go back down to this background copy layer. Let's select the dodge tool. Let's see if we can make some of these highlights in the clouds that are coming down stand out a little bit more. So I've set my range to highlights. Exposure's at 20%. I'm going to drop that down even farther. I'm going to go down to about 12. I'll click on a point, hold down the Shift key, move to another point, and click. And that's going to allow me to make straight lines, just highlighting those little streaks coming down through the clouds. Might want to adjust the size of the brush. And it just highlights things a little bit. All right. If it looks too obvious, go ahead and increase the size. Click a few times just to highlight different areas there. Or you can actually step back in your history to a point where you say, okay, that looks a little bit more natural. Let me demonstrate that right now. Let me go to Window, down to History. Here we have all these instances of the dodge tool. So I'll just click back to a couple points and see. And of course, another option, you can go in and darken that with the burn tool again. All right. So let me go ahead and crop this down before I get too far ahead of myself. I'm going to go 13 wide, 19 high, at 300 pixels per inch. Since I don't have a whole lot of foliage down here, I'm going to go ahead and I don't mind losing some of the clouds just to retain some of that because we got a nice rock down here at the bottom. Crop that out. All right, let's go ahead and darken the corners and see what that looks like. Put our focus right there in the center. And I'll do that with lens correction, of course, in VigNet. Go to Custom. Move my VigNet slider down. We'll just step through some of these. I'm going to reduce some of the vibrance just to take out some of that color. All right. I'm going to go up here to the soft light layer, select white as the foreground, and grab a brush, increase the size. We got opacity set to 30, flow set to 30, and what I'm going to do is just paint down here through these weeds and kind of brighten things up a little bit in the foreground. And I might even want to brighten a couple spots here on the tombstone. And we can use a slightly colored brush. Also, a little bit of green, a little bit of orange or yellow down here. Maybe some blue on this back mountain if we want to add more color. But for right now, I was more interested in just lightening the foreground here. Okay. Let me go ahead and select a dark green. And in that soft light layer, just go ahead and bring in a little bit more green color onto the plant. All right. So let's go back to that original HDR or pre-tone mapped version. And this is the corrected image. I'm going to drop it in a folder and move on to the next one.